What's up, Mech fans, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are talking about something that I have never talked about on the channel before, at least not properly anyway, and that is the Armored Core franchise, a video game series that has been running for almost 30 years at this point, with games releasing here and there. Of course, most recently, we did get the release of Armored Core 6, which essentially revived the mecha video game genre, if you will. But today we are actually going all the way back to 1997 and talking about that original game. But before we dive into it, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, head on down to the comments section below if you've ever played Armored Core, whether it's the first game or any of the other franchise, then let me know your general opinion on it. Now, for context as to why I'm talking about this game, because it isn't celebrating an anniversary of any kind, it did release on the PS5 about 2 months ago at this point. It's available on the PlayStation Plus Premium tier, but you can also buy it separately. And essentially, this is like a ported version of the PS1 version, kind of emulated in a way, so you can play it on the PlayStation 5. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of playing this game, and that's why it's kind of being talked about a little bit more recently. And everything I'm about to talk about, the good, the bad, all that kind of stuff, is viewed through the lens of this being a 30-year-old game, or almost 30-year-old game, because it released in 1997. So I am looking at it as almost a time capsule and appreciating it for what it was at the time. And I think one of the great things about Armored Core is that it really pushes the envelope in terms of what was possible with 3D gaming at that time. You look at, other 3D games that maybe came out around that time, Super Mario 64, platformers generally a lot more simplistic, so easier to do. Final Fantasy 7, again, like it's not a platformer, it's a JRPG, but that was pushing things in a lot of ways with its open world elements and such. But at the same time, the actual gameplay of it is very straightforward and simplistic. Obviously, there's complexity to it, but I'm talking more in terms of controls and such. Pretty simple. Armored Core, though, this is like real-time, third-person shooter kind of game that is pretty complex, not only in its controls, but also customization that we'll dive a little bit into as well. So it's a game that you have to respect, because you look at it from that perspective of what gaming was in 1997, and this probably blew a hell of a lot of people away. And that's why the franchise has continued to this day. It's still kind of pushing the envelope in many ways, because you look at Armored Core 6, that game looks phenomenal, plays in a way that is really its own thing, and it, really pushes things forward in terms of the mecha genre. But yes, in essence, this first Armored Core game for the time is a pretty incredibly impressive feat of gaming. The thing that really stood out to me personally, though, about this game is the world building and the general storytelling of it. Now, it is one of those games that is pretty much relying on, missions that don't really have like that kind of story continuity, like context to them. So you will just kind of go out and just do these like almost meaningless missions. They just feel like very standalone individual, and that is kind of how the missions play out within the game, where it doesn't feel quite as ongoing in terms of gameplay and such, in terms of locations and all that kind of thing, but there is kind of elements of storytelling there. But it's very much a game that, like, the world is the story. Like, there's a bit of a plot, there's bits of plot elements, but ultimately it's not like a, first act, second act, third act kind of structured story. But I kind of like that, because you really get engrossed in the world, you get engrossed in these competing factions and mercenary groups and corporations, and it's very much got that corporate political element to it, where this set of people trying to take hold of this base or this oil rig, or trying to get these resources and things like that. That's the kind of like world building and storytelling that I really like, because it very much feels grounded. It feels like something that could exist in this world. And when you're talking about, giant piloted robots, I think grounding that kind of stuff can really add that extra layer of like personal connection to it, where, you could kind of see a scenario where these giant robot things could very much exist in this world. Those kind of scenarios could exist in this world. And I think that's one of the more effective things about Armored Core, is that, yes, cool mecha action, but at the same time, it's such a mature and kind of sketchy, if you will, grounded take on what could actually happen with giant mechs, and how would different people use them. Another thing that's always been praised about the Armored Core franchise, which ultimately comes back to this very first game, is the customization. And I'll be honest, I personally didn't dive too much into it because when it comes to customization, if it's like really expansive, I get a little bit overwhelmed by it. It's the same reason I tend to get overwhelmed by open world games and why I generally avoid them, because there's way too much you could do that for me personally, it's kind of hard to focus in properly. So I just kind of go with the customization that works for me to be able to get through the story and get through missions and all that kind of stuff. So that's the route that I took. But when I was playing it and looking at the customization stuff you could do, you could tell there is a deep thought out system here where you have to pick parts that will almost merge together in ways. There's weight to things, there's certain power scaling and energy levels that things have. So you've got to make sure that like this, booster pack will work with this set of legs or this body and things like that. Is almost like grounded real world type customization where you've really got to think about how will this thing come together and actually work. You can't just throw loads of different parts and make this thing look weird and crazy, because you've got to think about how it's actually going to operate and feasibly, will the weight distribution work and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, for a game that came out almost 30 years ago, having this like depth of customization is incredibly impressive. With all that said though, playing this game for the very first time in 2025, it has undeniably aged, and that definitely affects the experience. And the biggest problem that I encountered is the camera work and the controls. Because this is essentially playing on a PS1, you are working with the PS1 controls. And we're talking early PS1 days where it didn't have, thumbsticks. This is working with buttons, D-pad, and triggers. So for example, in Armored Core 6, if you want to move the camera around, you're just going to use the right stick, and it just makes it a lot easier to effectively move the camera around properly. Within this game, though, you've got to think about using either the D-pad or the triggers to look up and down, to move left and right, and also to turn left and right. So for me personally, when I was playing it, I used the up and down arrows on the D-pad to look up and down, the left and right arrows on the D-pad to move left and right, the R1 and L1 triggers to turn left and right, the R2 trigger to move forward. You get the idea. It's difficult to get your head around and actually get to grips with it. And even when you do get to grips with it, it's still such a pain in the ass to try and play. And I get it. They're working with the technology at the time, but when you're playing it for the first time in 2025, even looking at it from the perspective of understanding why it plays like this, it doesn't change the fact that it's really hard to play, and it definitely impacts the experience in a negative way. So as much as I can appreciate so much about this game and what it did for the time, it's hard for me to sit here and say that I thoroughly enjoyed playing it. And again, it's down to the fact that it has evidently aged, and even if I'm looking at it from the perspective of getting it for the time, it doesn't change the fact that it's not the most enjoyable game to play in 2025. It's certainly not the most enjoyable game to control in 2025. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give Armored Core a B. But those were my thoughts on the original Armored Core game. Before I get out there, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you are a fan of mecha anime content. I want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. And like I said earlier, head on down to the comments section below. If you've played any of the Armored Core games, particularly this one, let me know what you thought of this particular game or the franchise in general. And also, what is your favorite game in this series? I've only really played a little bit of Armored Core 6 and then this one, so it's difficult for me to actually settle on a favorite. But if you'd like to see more Armored Core content, then let me know. Thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today. I'll see you guys next time.